Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, the Chief Editorial Officer and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, the featured country is Moldova. Given that Russia's imperialist ambitions may not end with Ukraine, could Moldova be Putin's next stop? Going back to Vladimir Putin's February 21, 2022 pivotal speech in which his imperialist ambitions were made clear, it was obvious that Putin sought to redraw post-Cold War national boundaries in Europe. To recapitulate Putin's words on February the 21st, he claimed that it was madness that former Soviet republics were allowed to leave the Soviet Union. That pronouncement would place several other countries, including NATO Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, as well as non-NATO states like Moldova, Sweden, and Finland, in Moscow's crosshairs. Putin was seeking to reconstitute the empire that existed under Moscow's grip before the collapse of the Soviet Union. In truth, this aspiration should be clear to the international community, given Russia's interventions into Transnistria under Moldovan jurisdiction, as well as South Ossetia and Abkhazia under Georgian jurisdiction. It was illustrated in vivid and shocking form from Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. In 2022, it was glaringly and painfully ostensible in the form of Russia's brutal war aimed at subduing and absorbing Ukraine. This aspiration has ruptured the security architecture of the Western world that has helped stabilize Europe since the last World War. But it also begs the question of where Putin might look next. Non-NATO states close to Russia would be at the top of his list. Finland and Sweden quickly recognized the risk to their own sovereignty and have moved towards NATO accession. Meanwhile, there is Moldova. With Russia active in the breakaway region of Transnistria, this would constitute low-hanging fruit for Russia. Transnistria is a disputed territory with a Russian ethno-linguistic population and separatist ambitions in Moldova. It is not recognized as a sovereign country by the international community. Shortly after Moldova declared its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, Transnistria declared its independence from Moldova, sparking an armed conflict between Moldovan and Transnistrian forces. Moldova has tried to accommodate its ethno-linguistic Russian minority by offering broad cultural and political autonomy, but the status of Transnistria remains unresolved. Since Russia has already used the argument that it must act to protect ethno-linguistic Russians in Ukraine, it could easily apply the same argument to Moldova. The geostrategic value of the Transnistria region to Moscow aside, as a bridge to the rest of eastern Ukraine, there is also the political motivation. The 2020 presidential election in Moldova had pitted the pro-Kremlin incumbent President Igor Dodon against the opposition leader and former Prime Minister Maia Sandu. The election offered voters a clear choice between pro-Russian Dodon, who wanted to preserve the country's strategic partnership with Moscow, and pro-Western Sandu, who wanted to advance closer ties with the European Union. Ultimately, it was pro-Western Sandu who emerged victorious with a strong and decisive victory over Putin's stalwart Dodon. Since the time of the Sandu presidency, Russian state media has intensified its attacks on the Moldovan government, which it views as adversarial and outside of Moscow's orbit. Going back to the start of March 2022, a map emerged showing the path of a Russian invasion that included the Transnistria region of Moldova. Almost 3 weeks later, at a pro-war rally, a Kremlinist singer sang an anthem about incorporating Moldova into Russia. While both incidents could be interpreted as merely anecdotal, they have to be considered in light of the escalation of disinformation and aggressive rhetoric aimed at Moldova in April of this year, 2022. First, Rustem Minakayev, acting commander of the Central Military District, announced that there were plans afoot for the Russian army to assist the alleged oppressed Russian-speaking population of Transnistria. Then, according to the Kyiv Independent, 2 Russian towers were reported to have blown up in Tiraspol, the capital of the Transnistria region. Ukrainian intelligence indicated that the explosions were a false flag operation carried out by Russian special services and quite likely intended to instill panic, spark tensions, and justify an invasion from the south. Around the same time, in April 2022, there was an uptick in disinformation from Russia regarding Romanian troops infiltrating Moldova with an eye on sparking a war. This outlandish claim about Romanian troops could be traced back to Igor Girkin, also known as Igor Strelkov, a Russian intelligence officer who played a significant role both in the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of the Donbass. Other Romanian disinformation about a Romanian attack on Transnistria was being spread by Putin's close advisor Sergei Markov. Most alarming was the reporting from the Moscow Times that Moscow would soon recognize the independence of Transnistria. Viktor Vodolatsky, deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on CIS Affairs, said that Pridnestrovye, that's the Russian name for Transnistria, considered itself part of the Russian Federation and wanted to be incorporated. Vodolatsky was also accusing the Moldovan government of being filled with nationalism and Nazism, justifications made by Russia to invade Ukraine. I should add, false justifications made by Russia to invade Ukraine. Although Russia was preoccupied with the project of brutalizing Ukraine into submission, should it succeed, it was possible that the Transnistria would be next on the target list as part of Putin's imperialist agenda. Another possibility was the Transnistria could be a companion piece to the war in Ukraine, with Russia using it as a launch pad for its efforts in Odessa and southern Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, I want to cover some highlights there. In Mariupol, the good news was that several hundred civilians were evacuated from the steel plant under siege. The bad news, the strike on the theater in Mariupol killed 600. 600 is an enormous death toll. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres traveled to Moscow to try to talk peace with Putin. When he arrived in Kyiv afterwards, he was met with Russian missiles. So much for peace. In the United States, President Biden has asked the U.S. Congress for $33 billion in funding for aid to Ukraine. The funding would be used to provide Ukraine with necessary artillery, armored vehicles, anti-armor and anti-air capabilities, cyber capabilities, and advanced air defense systems to defend itself against Russia. Some of the funds would also be earmarked to shore up the Ukrainian economy. $33 billion is a lot of money, but President Biden made clear that, and I quote, caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen, unquote. As well, United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi became the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Kyiv to offer solidarity to Ukraine and assure President Volodymyr Zelensky that the House would pass the president's aid package for Ukraine. Moving on to other parts of the world, there's a presidential election coming up in the Philippines, where the son of the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, is the heavy favorite to win. Elections also coming up in Lebanon, where political fractures could provide Hezbollah an advantage. And in Australia, the Conservative Liberal National Coalition was seeking re-election victory. That might not work out for them, as the opposition Labour is leading in the polls. Coming up in the next editions, in the future, I'll be covering the leaked draft of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling indicating that Roe v. Wade will be struck down. I'll also continue to cover the war in Ukraine, where Russia is not making as much progress as Putin would like in the Donbass. I'm also going to cover something we haven't talked a lot about, which is that Russia is losing the electronic battle against Ukraine. Then there's also Finland and Sweden looking at NATO accession. Also on my agenda, U.S. intelligence indicates that North Korea may soon resume nuclear underground testing. I'll also cover the election results in Philippines, Lebanon, and Australia. Subscribers can read more about these and other stories at the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. I'd also like to take this time to mention my comprehensive Afghanistan withdrawal report called Sunset in the Graveyard of Empires, which is available for purchase from the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com, as well as on Amazon. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember, now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.